Today I'm starting a new video series called Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 1. Officers were dispatched to a call about a burglary in progress. The homeowner was in the kitchen and heard running upstairs. Officers arrived and set up a perimeter around the house. A canine officer gave several warnings saying that they were going to let a canine loose. Just as he gave the command, a perimeter officer saw a hand pull the curtain back on the top floor and relayed the information over the radio. The canine officer sent the dog in, and sure enough, no one was found. The perimeter officer was 100% certain of what he saw, and the homeowner was sure he heard running upstairs. Like for Part 2, Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 2. A police department started receiving calls from a vacant house twice a night for almost a week. The voice on the phone sounded like an elderly lady with Alzheimer's, barely audible, saying, please help, with coughing. The voice on the phone was totally unresponsive to dispatch's questions. Every time police went to the house, there was no one there. A records check showed that the previous owner of the house was a woman taking care of her elderly mother who was dying of lung cancer. Please like and share for more creepy police stories. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 3. A deputy who worked a backwoods county area stopped his vehicle because he had to go to the bathroom. The nearest bathroom was 30 minutes away, so he decided to stop on the side of the road. The deputy had this unnerving feeling like someone was watching him. He looked around, and about 20 feet from his patrol vehicle, he saw a shadowy figure standing there watching him. The deputy stopped, zipped up, and started questioning the figure, who did not respond at all. The deputy was scared that it might be an ambush, so he ordered the figure to show him his hands. Finally, the deputy pulled out a flashlight and aimed it right at the figure, who disappeared. The deputy could hear no movement, no rustling in the bushes, nothing. The deputy jumped back in his patrol vehicle, took one look back, and saw the creature there again, this time approaching him. So he took off. Like and share for more creepy police stories. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 4. About 20 years ago, several officers responded to an alarm call at an old PTA building in Austin, Texas. They found an unsecured door on one side of the property. The youngest officer posted himself there while the other officer went to search the property. The officer was staring right at the door when all of a sudden the alarm sounded again and the door slammed shut right in his face. The senior officer ran right back over to his position and asked why he slammed the door. The youngest officer said, I didn't. The officers requested assistance from a canine unit. The dog searched the building and found nothing. Even though the dog was acting hinky like someone was in the building, it never picked up a scent. Finally, a key holder showed up. The officers told him what happened and he said, well, you know the place is haunted, right? He told them there was a secretary that used to work there for 30 years, and after she died, there were reports she kept showing up for work. Like and follow for more creepy cop stories. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 5. Now this one's from a 911 dispatcher. She got a call from a family saying their teenage daughter was possessed. The dispatcher assumed it might be a mental health issue or possibly drug-related, but the family assured her she had no history of anything like that. The family members were holding her down, and over the phone, the dispatcher could hear two people yelling at each other. The dispatcher asked the family to tell whoever was yelling at her to stop. The family replied, it's her. The dispatcher said, I know it's her. Get whoever's yelling at her to stop. The family replied, it's her. Both voices. The dispatcher couldn't really explain it, but she could definitely tell she was listening to a young girl's voice with an adult male yelling back. In this situation, do not call 911, call a Catholic priest. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 6. One evening, several officers brought in a combative subject who was arrested for domestic violence. As they were bringing him into holding, they walked past cell number 1. The officers didn't pay much attention to him, but there was a guy standing in the cell. He looked normal, there was nothing really out of the ordinary about him. Later on in the shift, the officer was asked by a sergeant to do a head count before transporting the prisoners to county jail. The officer started with cell 1 and found it was empty. Everyone started to panic because they thought they lost a prisoner. They went over all the paperwork and found no one was ever placed in cell 1. The officers went to check video surveillance and found that sure enough, indeed, there was someone standing in cell 1. But the creepy thing was, as soon as the officers walked by the cell door, he just blinks out of existence. The officers tried to put this evidence of paranormal activity on a DVD or USB drive, but the footage didn't show up. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 7. At around 2 a.m., a young officer returned back to the patrol station because she was coming off shift. At that time of night, the station was usually empty. As she was walking towards the locker room, she walked by an empty admin area. She saw an older male officer that she didn't recognize, so she greeted him. He ignored her, and as she looked over her shoulder, she noticed he was gone. She was creeped out, but she just told herself she was imagining things. A couple of days went by, and she saw the picture of the same officer she saw that night on the wall of fallen officers. The officer had killed himself several years before. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 8. This one comes to us from Espanola, New Mexico, and just so you know, it has video. Late at night, an officer was watching surveillance cameras at the station, and this is what he saw. A figure walks through the sally port of the station parking lot. He checked and the sally port door never opened, and he couldn't find anyone in the parking lot. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 9. About 10 years ago, a couple repeatedly called police about hearing footsteps in their home in Imperial, Missouri. The responding officer had been there twice and found nothing, and figured the third time would be just the same. When he got there, he found an open sliding glass door, and something had set off the motion light. The officer looked all around the outside of the house and couldn't find any footprints in the snow that would have caused the motion light to be set off. As he interviewed the couple as to what happened, he heard creaking in the floorboards upstairs like someone was walking on them. He looked around again and couldn't find anything. The officer said, out of his 27 years of policing, it was the creepiest thing he had ever experienced. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 10. This is an audio recording from 1981 by a police officer who saw a UFO. Listen for yourself.
Yeah, all it is now is just an orange glow. That's all I can see. Just an orange glow. Because the sun is coming up. Better not be. It's awful early. Early for the sun paper, Joe. I don't think the sun would just be in that one spot. It moved up to a higher vantage point, so you tell us what it does. Listen.
Freaky. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 11. This one comes to us from a police officer in Nebraska, and let me tell you, this story freaked me out. One night the officer was checking on an abandoned house that was often hit by thieves who stole the copper wire inside. He checked on it twice that night. First time at 7 p.m., everything was fine. 2 hours later, he noticed an open back door, but he couldn't see any footprints in the snow. He told dispatch he was investigating the open door and he went inside. All of a sudden, he heard a thump come from upstairs, and he thought he heard the sound of kids playing. He went upstairs to investigate, and he heard the thump several more times, and the sound of laughter get stronger and stronger. He entered the bedroom where he heard the sounds, and didn't find anyone inside. What he did find, however, was a ripped out page of a children's book with the drawing of a police officer on it. He left the house, and he never went back. Like and follow for more. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 12. This one is from my best friend who's also a cop. I'm going to read his report word for word. It's kind of silly, but kind of creepy too. I arrived on scene and immediately noticed a strange feel to the area. Numerous dogs were barking and a single loud howl echoed from somewhere nearby. With shivers running down my spine, I approached the incident location. I spoke to the reporting party through the door, who was terrified and refused to come out. He stated a dog, larger than he'd ever seen with blue glowing eyes, was tearing apart the fence outside of his bedroom window. On the east end of the property, I located numerous very large paw prints. At numerous points on the top of the 8-foot wood fence, there were bite and deep claw marks. The fence had been ripped apart in numerous spots. I am unaware of any animal that would be able to chew on the top of an 8-foot fence. At this time, it is unknown what caused the damage. I was unable to locate any animal matching the reporting party's description. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 13. An officer responded to a residence in reference to a psychiatric issue. The homeowner told the officer her son had taken drugs and was convinced that whenever he entered his room, he saw a man wearing a World War II uniform hanging from the ceiling. When the officer talked to the son directly, he told him he was ordered by an evil spirit not to enter the room because it was his father hanging from the ceiling. The officer entered the room and didn't find anything. A veteran officer later responded and told the young officer that he had been to that house years before. What he responded to was a call about an old man wearing a World War II veteran uniform who had hung himself. The initial officer had no idea about the previous call. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 14. A police officer wrote about his experience when responding to an elderly lady's house. The lady insisted there was a young girl running around her property at night. The officer first checked outside the house and didn't find anything. The officer went back inside the house to talk to the elderly lady who was petrified. The lady told him she's inside the house. Soon after, the cops saw a girl about 13 years old run from one side of the house to the other. He told her to stop, but it seemed like she disappeared into thin air. The lady yelled to him, saying that the girl was now in the front yard. Sure enough, the officer saw her standing out in the rain. He tried to stop her, but again she disappeared without an explanation. He searched all over the property, but couldn't find her anywhere. A few months later, the officer found out the old lady had passed away, and the new tenants that moved in started calling about a 13-year-old girl on their property. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 15. 2 Oregon State troopers were dispatched to a call about a man holding a gun to a woman's head. When the officers arrived, they found a woman crying over and over again saying, "He shot me, he shot me." The officers checked her and couldn't find any apparent injuries and informed her she hadn't been shot. The woman gave officers her name but refused any help from them. She declined an offer by the officers to get a ride somewhere else. Since she refused any kind of help, the officers had no choice but to leave her. Back at the station, one of the officers looked up the woman's name. He discovered that a woman with the same name was shot and killed by her husband years earlier. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 16. This story is about a mother's love that was so strong, it transcended the veil between life and death. A mother and her infant daughter were driving near the Spanish Fork River in Utah. The mother lost control of the vehicle and plunged into the river. Approximately 14 hours later, a fisherman found the vehicle and notified emergency responders. When first responders arrived, they saw no signs of life and figured it was just an abandoned vehicle. As they got closer to observe the wreck, they heard a woman's voice yelling for help. When they flipped over the vehicle, they found that the mother was clearly deceased, but they found the baby girl unconscious but alive. The baby girl was treated for hypothermia and was later found in the investigation that the mother died on impact. All the first responders swore they heard the voice of a call for help. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 17. I saved this one special for Halloween, so make sure you turn the volume up and listen to what this officer heard on his body camera footage in California while searching a building. Happy Halloween. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 18. This one's pretty bizarre. A police officer made a traffic stop on a man in a vehicle. The police officer spoke with the man and didn't really notice anything out of the ordinary. When the officer returned to his vehicle, he noticed a female officer standing next to him. He didn't recognize her and he didn't call for backup. The only thing she said to him was, "He has a gun in the back seat." The officer cautiously approached the vehicle again, arrested the man, and sure enough, found a gun in the back of the car. After this, the female officer was nowhere to be found. It turns out the man he arrested was wanted for murdering a female police officer years before. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 19. This creepy story comes to us from a police officer in St. Louis, Missouri. He was dispatched to a Victorian-style house in reference to a burglary alarm going off. The owner was out of town and there was an open door. The officers went inside the house, and when they entered, the door slammed behind them. Thinking it might have just been the wind or a pressure change, they decided to keep searching the house. They searched the entire house without finding anything, but when they went back downstairs, they heard a noise. The faucets on all the sinks downstairs were turned on, and the water was running. They never found an explanation about what happened, and I don't think any of them returned there ever again. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 20. This is another one that really creeps me out. While working at night, a police officer came across a vehicle parked in an empty church parking lot. He figured it was just kids having a late-night Bible study. He drove up next to the vehicle and found no one inside. He pulled his unit around to the back of the car so he could run the license plate to see if it was a stolen vehicle that was dumped in the parking lot. The officer looked down as he ran the plate, looked back up, and he saw someone sitting in the front seat staring at him through the rearview mirror. This is something that cops really pay attention to, that you're trained to observe on traffic stops. He had that, "oh crap, I missed something" moment, and he drove up next to the car to talk to the driver. When he drove back up next to the car, there was no one there. The officer said it freaked him out so much, he took off. And when he went back the next night, the vehicle was gone. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 21. In 2007, ABC News documented a series of phone calls to families with terrifyingly specific death threats. The unidentified callers knew exactly where the families were and what they were wearing. The callers would call all throughout the night and make threats to kill their children, their grandparents, and even their pets. The callers would even send families recordings from their private conversations. One was even with a police detective. One police department tried to investigate by tracing the callers. The calls were traced back to the victims' own phones, even when the phones were turned off. There were never any suspects found or arrests made. Some people think it was hackers, other people think it was a hoax. What do you think? Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 22. Even though the story's pretty sad, it's also pretty incredible. Officers responded to a call about a father who went crazy and decided to shoot his family. He killed his wife and started looking for his 5-year-old son. The boy ran outside and was trying to hide on the side of the house behind some trash cans. The father eventually found him and at point blank unloaded almost an entire magazine on the boy. When the officers arrived, they found the boy in shock, hiding right where the dad found him. There wasn't a wound on his body. There were bullet holes all over the side of the house around the boy. When they questioned the boy about what happened, he said, "An angel was in front of me with a shield, and he saved me. He pushed the gun away from me." Not a scary story, but pretty incredible. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 23. Here's another one that's a little more on the supernatural paranormal side than it is creepy and scary, but it'll give you goosebumps. A detective wrote about an experience when he interviewed a young mother and her toddler. She told him about her boyfriend violently raping her at knife point. The detective, who specialized in sex crimes, wrote that it was one of the most violent and sadistic cases he had ever seen. Part of the investigation required him to speak with the toddler who was present during the entire incident. During the interview, the toddler recalled their father getting angry and hitting the mom. Then the toddler said, "A nice woman showed up and she couldn't see past the nice woman. She held her, told her they were both going to be safe, and sang her a song in a different language." The toddler said the nice woman went over to the door and knocked. This story's kind of long, so head over to the next video to finish the story. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 23, continued. In the victim's interview, she told the detective her ex-boyfriend had the knife up to her throat and was going to kill her. He got distracted for some reason and ran out of the apartment. She had no explanation why. The suspect was caught later that day and interviewed, where he confessed to everything. When asked about the knife to his ex-girlfriend's throat, he said, "I swear to God I was going to cut her throat open, but I thought I heard a knock at the door and thought it was the police. Once I saw it was clear, I ran outside." The suspect is now serving life in prison, and the mom and toddler are safe. That day, someone protected the toddler from seeing something horrific and protected the mother's life. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 24. One night, 2 officers responded to an alarm call at an elementary school. They arrived, saw all doors were locked, and left. 20 minutes later, they get another activation. They check the doors, and this time a maintenance door on the outside of the school was open. They find no one, secure it, and leave again. Another 20 minutes goes by, and they get another activation. They called for a key holder to respond to the school to let them in so they could check the inside. While they waited, they split up and watched each side of the school. No one exited or entered. The custodian showed up and let them inside the school. At around 3 a.m., the 3 of them walked through the school, checking doors, classrooms, and hallways. They found an open janitor's closet with the light on. Inside the small room, they found no one. When they looked down on the ground, however, they found the bare footprint of a child in some freshly spilled water. Scary Things Police Have Seen, Part 25. One night, 2 officers were dispatched to an old office building that had been converted to a doctor's office. They were set to meet a key holder there to let them in regarding a motion sensor that had gone off. When they arrived, the key holder was already there and he let them in. They left the key holder on the first floor while they went to the second floor where the motion sensor had gone off. After they cleared the building, they went back down and found the key holder was gone. The officers asked dispatch to try to get a hold of the key holder so that they can tell him that the building was clear. Dispatch told the officers that was impossible because the key holder hadn't even arrived yet. The key holder was still about 10 minutes away. After the 10 minutes was up, a different person arrived and was confused on how the officers got in the building. They gave a description of the first key holder to her, and she told them that was a doctor that had committed suicide several days prior. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 26. This one is super random, but is actually posted on the CIA's website. Back in 1986, the writer of the story was working the agency's security protective force and making security rounds. It was nighttime and there was supposed to be no one around. He heard a basketball bouncing inside the gym. As he approached the entrance to the gym, it was very obvious that there was someone in there shooting baskets. When he entered the room, the sound stopped, so he turned on the lights. There was absolutely no one inside the gym. All he saw was a basketball just sitting at the free throw line. He didn't hear any footsteps running away, nothing. Pretty creepy, and I find it so weird that it's posted on the CIA's website. Scary Things Police Have Seen, Part 27. This one comes to us from a former police officer in Maine. The officer received a call from dispatch from a woman who said she heard Native American drumming coming from her basement. Obviously, the cop thought she was a little crazy. She arrived at the house at about 11 o'clock at night. She walked up to the house, and as soon as the homeowner opened the door, the cop could hear the faint drumming coming from inside the house. The homeowner asked, "Do you hear it?" The cop thought someone was messing with her, so she went to the basement to investigate. As she approached the basement door, the drumming got louder and louder, and she could even hear chanting. As soon as she opened the basement door, the drumming and chanting stopped completely. She investigated the basement. There was no one down there, no speakers, recorders, anything like that. This is why you don't build houses on Indian burial grounds. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 28. This story comes to us from an armed security guard that worked for the Department of Homeland Security in New Mexico. The government bought an abandoned town called Plias to use for training. The writer of the story said on his first day of work, he spent the entire shift checking doors with his trainer. He came to an old medical facility that had an open back door. They cleared the building, didn't find anything, and then went back to the back door to exit. As soon as he put his hand on the door, he heard a baby cry from within the facility. They rushed back in, and sure enough, they didn't find anything. They both brushed it off, thinking it might be an old rusty air conditioner or something like that. A week later, the writer of the story was now on patrol by himself, checking the buildings. He came across the medical facility, and all the doors were locked. As he walked away, he heard the same baby cry again, but this time over his own radio. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 29. In 2014, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department in Iowa responded to a house in reference to a man that had been stabbed in the chest. The place where it happened was pretty famous. It's known as the Villisca Axe Murder House. It's supposed to be one of the most haunted places in America, where 2 adults and 6 children were killed. The murderer was never found. But in 2014, a group of friends who were doing a paranormal investigation stayed at the house, which is now a tourist attraction. At about 12:45 a.m., around the same time the murders took place, the victim radioed to his friends asking for help. His friends found him with a stab wound in his chest. The victim did recover, and it was written as a self-inflicted wound, but he has never come out to speak about what happened that night. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 30. In 2016, in North London, police did a death investigation at a residence. A 26-year-old male was bound down for 3 days without medical attention. According to the deceased family, he was acting strange and aggressive. He attacked family members, talked about cutting off his own body parts, and complained about a serpent being inside of him. The BBC reported saying the family then set about attempting to cure the male through restraint and prayer over the next 3 days. The deceased brother said, "It's clear that thing was in him. What we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him. We had to restrain him for himself. It was clear if we didn't restrain him, he could have tried to harm people in our family." When police arrived, the brother was attempting to resurrect him by chanting. The family members were charged with manslaughter but found not guilty. Weird. Scary Things Police Have Seen, Part 31. Sometimes the scariest things aren't paranormal. This story is the point of view of a gas station convenience store worker. A suspicious-looking man came in, walked around the store, went back out, pumped his gas, and left without paying. The woman was able to get the license plate number, and she called the police to report what had happened. Less than an hour later, a police officer went to the convenience store to speak with her. The police officer asked her to identify the man, which she did. It turns out the man she had seen was wanted for 2 murders. He had murdered a convenience store clerk after kidnapping her and robbing her. The police officer told her that him walking in the store, all suspicious-like, was the exact same thing he did when he murdered the other woman. Needless to say, the writer of the story feels very lucky he didn't do to her what he had done before. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 32. This is another story from near Espanola, New Mexico. A detective from Espanola was driving a rural mountain road to Chama, which has a history of witchcraft. At about sunset, the detective saw a wolf on a small hill on the side of the road. He had never seen a wolf in that area before, so he got ready to take a picture. The detective saw the wolf look at him, stand up on his hind legs, and run down the opposite side of the mountain, out of sight. This story was sent to me by Jeremy Betancourt. Thank you, Jeremy. He said that this detective was a very serious guy and wouldn't make something like this up. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 33. This story is from the Honolulu Police Department. One rookie officer spoke about patrolling the Poly Lookout one night. She was assigned to lock the gates along the highway. She locked the first gate and then drove along the highway to the second gate. She saw a strange woman dressed in white walking on the side of the road. What do cops do? They investigate, so she pulled over to ask the woman if she was all right. The officer looked down to roll down the window, looked back up, and the woman was gone. The rookie had an eerie feeling like she wasn't alone and looked in the rearview mirror. The woman in white was in her back seat. The officer remembered her grandmother telling her to remain calm if she ever encountered a spirit. The officer continued driving to her destination and started talking to the spirit in order to stay calm. The woman never replied. The rookie got out of her vehicle to lock the second gate, and when she went back to her car, the spirit was gone. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 34. In 1997, a woman purchased a house that used to be used as a hospital. She lived there by herself until there was a home invasion robbery. The criminals broke in, tied her to a chair, and brutally murdered her. Years later, a static 911 call came from the house. 2 officers responded. When they arrived, they found the house was empty. The officers asked dispatch to call the number back, but the line was disconnected. A few minutes later, dispatch called the officers and told them to come back to the station immediately. The dispatcher was listening to the call and decided to turn the frequency all the way up. In the audio, a muffled voice could be heard. The voice said, "Help me, help me. They are going to kill me." This story was sent to me by Cody Flynn, whose father was one of the officers that responded that night. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 35. This story was sent to me by a Louisiana police officer. Thanks, buddy. He told me this encounter made him believe in the paranormal. About 2 weeks ago, this officer and his partner were dispatched to a break-in. They arrived and could clearly hear movement inside the house. They went inside, and in the back room, they heard objects moving and heard a television turn on. They made commands for the person inside to come out with their hands up. At that moment, the television turned off and the door flew open. There was no one there, but the officers could hear faint footsteps walking past them in the hallway. They searched the room and there was no one there. They searched the rest of the house, and in the living room, the officer felt something pull on his ear. But there was no one there. When the homeowner showed up, they explained to him what happened. The homeowner said his father used to live there, and he was a violent man who used to twist the kids' ears a lot, but he died 2 weeks ago. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 36. This story was sent to me by a deputy in Ohio. One night, he responded to a house to assist an elderly lady. The lady called and complained about her neighbor's horses whinnying, neighing, running around at all hours of the night. The lady also had dementia and was the only one living in the area, so the deputy thought the complaint was due to her mental status. Yet, the deputy made the decision to investigate just in case. The neighbor's house had been abandoned for 10 years, and he wanted to check to see if anyone was squatting inside. He looked around the inside of the house, which had no doors or windows. He found no one inside. As he checked the backside of the house, he noticed a crumbling barn on the property. As he walked closer to the abandoned barn, he heard, clear as day, the sound of horses walking, neighing, and whinnying. He left the location, and I don't blame him, because I wouldn't want to mess with some demon horses either. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 37. This video, one of the creepiest I've ever seen, was sent to me by a police officer in South Carolina. He responded to a residence because of motion being picked up in an upstairs bedroom. He got there and the house was completely secure. The homeowner shows up, lets them inside. They don't find anyone in there, and nothing was disturbed. He pulls up video from an indoor surveillance camera, and this is what they see. Come to find out, the residence was previously owned by a family that had passed away from natural causes, except one small boy. There was never a death record for him, but he went missing after his 9th birthday. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 38. This story was sent to me by a police officer in Missouri. An elderly lady passed away alone in her home. This officer and his partner arrived to conduct a death investigation. The officers waited for the county coroner to arrive in the same room where the body was found. While waiting, a broom leaning on the back of the couch fell to the ground. It startled them, but brooms fall down all the time, right? A few seconds after the broom fell, a small hand exercising device fell from off the dining room table. But the device was originally in the center of the table. There wasn't a draft in the house, and no explanation as to why the objects fell. But all these objects fell in the same room where the deceased was found. What do you think? The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 39. This story was sent to me by a police officer in Texas. This took place at Laredo College, which is made up from an old military fort, and near the river that separates the U.S. and Mexico. Late at night, the officer was watching the road next to the river. He saw 4 people marching in a single file line across the road and down to the river. The officer investigated to see what was going on, but he couldn't follow them because he couldn't find any footprints in the dirt. He made his way down to the river and still couldn't find anyone. He said there was no way for 4 individuals to walk that direction and not leave some kind of trace. He called for assistance and a senior officer arrived. He explained what happened to him, and the officer laughed. He said, "You saw ghosts from the old fort. Back in the day, it was common for soldiers to march down to the river together to fetch water. Apparently their ghosts walk the same path today." The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 40. I love paranormal stories from different cultures. This story was sent to me by the son of a police officer in Australia. The officer was on patrol with his partner, who was an Aboriginal elder. They were in the Northern Territory about 3 hours from civilization. When they stopped, the officer noticed on the side of a road a lot of footprints. The footprints looked like they belonged to children and led towards a mountain off in the distance. The officer asked his Aboriginal partner what he thought, and he said, "I have no clue." When they got back to the station, the officer talked to his supervisor about what happened. The supervisor knew exactly what he was talking about. He spoke of a traditional indigenous story about tiny people who lived in the mountains who would come down and steal from locals. He also said the indigenous people were not allowed to talk about them, and his partner would deny what they saw. Sure enough, when the officer spoke to his partner again about what happened, the partner denied ever seeing footprints in the first place. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 41. This story was sent to me by a corrections officer in Arizona. He worked at a jail in Kingman, which has an old legend about a little girl which haunts its halls. Her name is Delilah. One night, this officer was working alone in a control room after the facility lockdown. While looking at the control panel, the officer saw in the corner of his eye what appeared to be someone's head and shoulders looking over the panel at him. He looked over the panel and saw nothing. About 30 minutes later, the officer felt something tug on the back of his uniform. He also heard a soft giggle. When he turned around, there was no one there. He told the corporal about what happened, and he responded, "Well, I guess Delilah likes you." The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 42. This story was sent to me by a police officer in California who wished to be anonymous. On June 17th, 2002, an air tanker crashed near Walker, California, while on a firefighting mission. The crash was even caught on camera. An officer saw the crash and ran to it. While running through the forest, he came upon 3 men in flight suits who seemed dazed and confused. He asked them if they saw the crash, but they wouldn't respond to him. Since they weren't helpful, he continued on. When he got to the crash site, he found that all passengers on board were killed. There were 3 men on board that plane. The officer went back to where he saw the men in the forest, but he couldn't find them anywhere. No one else who responded to the crash site had seen them. The officer then realized that the 3 men he saw in the forest were the spirits of the crew members that died that day. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 43. This was sent to me by a police officer in Three Forks, Montana. In the town, there is a historic hotel built in 1882. Officers frequently respond for strange noise complaints. One evening, this officer responded there for a call about a suspicious person. A bartender said she was getting ready to close for the night when she heard something strange upstairs. She investigated, and in a storage space upstairs, she saw a man dressed in a white coat and wearing a chef's hat. She was terrified and called 911. When the officer responded, he too could hear noises coming from upstairs. He went to the storage space and saw the same man. The man ran into an adjacent room and the officer followed. When the officer turned the corner, the room was empty. There was no other way for the man to exit the room. The officer could tell that the boxes in the storage space had been moved because of lines left in the dust. Pretty freaky. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 44. This story was sent to me by Mike, who went on a ride-along with deputies in Manatee County, Florida. Mike and the deputies were in a wooded area and responded to a call. In an opening in the woods, they saw a humanoid creature with pink skin. It ran out of sight, and they couldn't find the creature anywhere. Sounds like something kinda hard to believe, right? This isn't the only sighting, however. There have been multiple 911 calls about people having seen this creature. There's even a social media group where locals have talked about their sightings. In one post, a lady talks about seeing a creature with floating flesh skin, no facial features, no hair, and being incredibly fast. What could it be? The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 45. This story was sent to me by a police officer in Cairo, Egypt. One night, this officer was stationed at a desert checkpoint. At the end of the shift, he left the checkpoint with his partners. They were about 150 kilometers away from the nearest city or town. In this area, it is common for drug dealers to hide just off the side of the road and signal to cars to buy drugs from them. While driving, the officer saw a man wearing a jalabia just standing off the side of the road. They stopped to investigate. The man ran up and over a sand berm and out of sight. The officers pursued and went over the sand berm about 4 seconds after the man. When they reached the top, they couldn't see him anywhere. What they did see, however, was what appeared to be a hairless dog running away from them on all fours. I've been getting a lot of stories about strange creatures lately. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 46. This was sent to me by a nephew of a trucker who had an encounter with a police officer. This trucker was driving on Highway 152 in California. He got pulled over by a highway patrol officer. It was odd though, because the police vehicle looked like an older 80s model unit. The officer gave him a ticket and left. Later on, the trucker went to the courthouse to fight the ticket. The judge looked at the ticket, got up and asked, "Do you think this is a joke?" The trucker said, "Why?" The judge told him that the officer's name and ID number used on the ticket belonged to an officer that had died on that freeway almost 40 years earlier. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 47. This story was sent to me by a police officer in Iowa who wished to be anonymous. Several years ago, a young woman went missing and there were extensive searches for her body. This officer volunteered from out of the area to search for her. After spending the whole day searching, he and another officer went for a run. As they were cooling down after the jog, they heard a voice. It was someone asking for help. There was no yelling and the voice remained calm. They shouted out for the individual and tried to look for who was speaking. They couldn't find anyone. Several days later, and after about a month of being missing, the woman's killer was found. He confessed to killing her weeks prior and led law enforcement to where he hid her body. The spot was within a half a mile of where the officers heard the voice asking for help. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 48. This story was sent to me by the son of a police officer in London. One night on patrol, he got a call about a car that had crashed in the middle of the forest. It ran off the road and off the edge of a bank. The officer arrived at the road where the call came out and got behind a van that was in front of him. He could see the emergency lights ahead of him from the emergency personnel who were already on scene. Suddenly, he heard a loud screech, and the van slid from the roadway, down the bank, and crashed into a tree. The police officer stopped to investigate. When he got out of his patrol vehicle, he heard a loud, metallic scratching noise coming from the van. He ran down the bank to help the occupants of the vehicle, but couldn't find anyone inside. What he did find, however, was what appeared to be deep claw marks on the side of the van. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 49. This story was sent to me on Instagram by a police officer who worked for the Watervliet Arsenal Police Department in New York. There was a structure there they called Building 10. One night, he and a partner were locking up the building because it housed the base commander's office. The police officer locked one of the doors, and when he turned around, he saw someone run down a breezeway. This was the only staircase and entrance to the basement area of the building. He called out to his partner and let him know that someone ran away from him. They searched the entire basement, but it was completely empty. Maybe just one of those trick of the eyes. A few days later, that officer drove by the building again. He looked up at one of the attic windows and saw a person staring at him. He shined his spotlight at the person, and they vanished. Needless to say, that officer never went in that building alone again. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 50. This story comes from a police officer in Japan. It happened at the Aokigahara Forest. One day while on patrol, a police officer heard a woman cry for help near the edge of the forest. He rushed in to assist, and he found her. She told him she was out enjoying a hike when she got lost and asked for his help to find a way out. The police officer showed her the way. He noticed a unique scarf the woman was wearing, and he complimented her on it. She told the officer her mother made it for her by hand when she was a little girl. Once they got to the edge of the forest, they said goodbye. The next day, the officer responded to a report of hikers coming across a body in the forest. He responded and was in shock with what he saw. The badly decomposed body wore that same scarf the woman the previous day had worn. The woman had been dead for weeks. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Episode 51. This story was sent to me on Instagram by the son of a police officer in the Manchester Police Force. There is a 300-year-old abandoned mansion that is still fitted with an alarm system to keep out intruders. One night the alarm went off, and this officer met up with the K9 unit in front of the house. The dog was described as being very tough and not scared of a thing, but it refused to go near the house. The officers searched the entire inside and found nothing but dead crows and dead rats. After the house was clear, they went outside to check on the dog. It was whining and staring up at the house. The officers followed the dog's line of sight and saw it was looking at an attic window. Inside the window, the officers could see a man wearing Victorian-era clothing staring back at them. For a moment, they stared at each other until the man took a step backwards and out of sight. The officer rushed back inside, looking for the man. Again, no one was found. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, episode 52. This story is from a correctional officer at a prison in Pendleton, Oregon. At about 2 a.m. on a graveyard shift, an officer was alone at his desk. He looked up to observe the dark cell block and saw an inmate standing in the middle of the room. The officer told the man to get back inside the cell. He refused and didn't move. The officer radioed for a sergeant to assist him. The sergeant arrived and also ordered the man to return to the cell, but he continued to refuse. The sergeant began to approach the inmate with his pepper spray drawn. The sergeant told the officer to turn on the lights. He got closer and closer to the inmate. As soon as the lights turned on, the inmate disappeared. There was no one there, but they had both seen a figure. You see, this prison has a lot of history. It used to be a state mental hospital. When it was converted to a prison, there were 100 unmarked jars of cremated remains found in tunnels underneath. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen, episode 53. This is a story that made international news in Scotland in 2016. Police officers were called to a residence by a homeowner. The house was occupied by a woman and her young son. She was in fear because objects around the house had been moving on their own. Police officers originally thought this was going to be a mental health issue, but they were wrong. They arrived and spoke with the homeowner about what was happening. During that initial conversation, one officer heard a noise coming from the kitchen and went to investigate. As she walked in, the oven door slammed shut with no one around it. After that, a kitchen towel flew past her head like someone had thrown it. They called for a supervisor who arrived at the house. He walked in and observed the sofa and lampshades moving on their own. The family's chihuahua randomly appeared on a 7-foot hedge. Police determined there was nothing they could do to help the family, so a priest was called to bless the house. You can read more about this online. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, episode 54. Imagine being alone and having this encounter. An abandoned apartment complex in California was known for being a high-crime area. The apartment was cleared and scheduled for demolition. The sender of this story, a security officer, was assigned to guard the complex at night. One night he patrolled the outside of the complex. Suddenly, he heard a scream coming from inside. He saw a light on in a window of the 3rd floor. He looked closer and saw a woman standing in the window looking at him. He went up to investigate and saw it was apartment number 329. He yelled to whoever was inside the apartment to come out, but no one answered. He went inside but found no one there. The light was still on, and he looked at the window where he saw the woman. He noticed something odd. There was what appeared to be a blood stain underneath the window. Just then the light turned off and the door slammed shut. He ran outside the apartment and found no one there. He did some research and found out a woman was brutally murdered by her husband in apartment 329. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, episode 55. This story is from a police officer in South Africa. He responded to an alarm call at a school with 2 of his partners. They searched the campus and found an open bathroom door. The door had a padlock on it that was open. It was the only locked bathroom on the campus. They all 3 walked in. Each had an uneasy feeling, but the bathroom was empty. They left, shut the door, and secured the padlock. As they were walking away, one officer realized he left his flashlight in the bathroom. They turned back to see if they could get inside to get it. They walked up to the door, and it flew open on its own. The padlock landed on the floor next to them. They decided the flashlight was not worth it and they left. The next morning, they talked to school officials about what happened and why the bathroom was locked. They said an 8-year-old girl died in that bathroom years before. Since her death, that door has been replaced several times because it opens and closes violently. The officer never found his flashlight. He did find small scratch marks on his leg that looked like they were caused by a child. Scariest Things Police Have Seen. Have you ever thought that old abandoned boats were creepy? You might after this video. This story comes from a security guard at a shipyard in Channelview, Texas. One night he patrolled a shipyard that was supposed to be empty. At about 2 a.m. he saw a man working on one of the boats that was in the repair section. He told him to leave, but the man completely ignored the guard. The guard climbed the ladder to get to the top of the boat to detain the man. When he got to the top, the man was gone. It was like he completely vanished into thin air. He searched all around but couldn't find the man. The boat was too high off the ground for anyone to safely jump off. In the morning after his shift, the guard spoke with the manager and told him what he saw. The manager said he didn't have anyone working that night. But years prior, someone had been working on that very boat and accidentally fell to their death. It is now believed that the boat is haunted by that man's ghost. The Scariest Things Police Have Seen. This story is from a Texas police officer who responded to a motion alarm call at an old funeral home. The door was unlocked, so this officer and his partner began clearing each room to ensure there was no one inside. They cleared every room in the entire building. After checking a room, they would prop open a door to make sure they knew as a tactic that they had already checked that room. There was no one inside the funeral home except for a few dead bodies. On their way out, they walked down the main hall where they entered through. They passed a door that was shut, but they were certain they had checked that room already. They opened the door and found the room was empty. As they walked out of the room, they heard a loud bang coming from the very back of the funeral home where they kept the bodies. They knew the building was cleared, but they felt very uneasy, so they went outside to wait for the owner. When the owner showed up, they told him about what happened. The owner said he wasn't surprised, because in his 30 years of working there, he had definitely seen people walking around while he was alone. Imagine how scary it would be to be an inmate in a haunted prison. This story comes from a guard at a prison in New Mexico. He worked at the facility segregation unit where inmates are kept alone. One night after lights were out, this guard began conducting security checks. He was on the second tier when a new inmate stopped him and asked him to talk to the guy in the cell next door. All night long, there had been knocking on the wall in between their two cells. The complaining inmate yelled at him to stop several times. Every time he yelled, the pounding would stop, but would resume shortly after. The guard looked inside the cell and told the inmate it was completely empty. The guard returned to his colleagues and told them about what the inmate had said. His colleagues informed him that the last person to reside inside that cell was an inmate who hung himself just days prior. I'm about to show you possible paranormal activity caught on camera at a jail in London, Kentucky. The person who sent me the video is a former corrections officer at the facility. The video focuses on a cell that's supposed to be empty. And remember, correctional officers check cells almost every hour.
It's goddamn creepy.
Alright.
Is there nobody in that cell?
No! Listen!
Nobody's in that cell.
No!
It's closed right there.
When we was
you ready?
cell there a while ago at 12:12 and there was a...
Oh, that's freaking sweet.
If you didn't see it, it looks like someone moves in front of the window. Remember, it's a jail, and the only way in or out is through that door you're looking at. This is a terrifying story from police officers in Richmond, Virginia. One night, several residents in a neighborhood called and complained about hearing yelling and screaming coming from inside a house. The officers got on scene and found the front door was ajar. They made their way inside and clearly heard yelling and screaming coming from upstairs. The staircase was narrow and provided little cover for the officers, so they yelled from downstairs and told them to stop fighting and come out. Their commands were ignored, and they continued to hear the sound of the fight escalating. The officers grabbed a shield and formed an entry team to make their way upstairs and stop the disturbance. Once the officers got to the landing, the screaming and shouting stopped. The officers again ordered whoever was fighting to come out, but all they heard was silence. They checked every inch of that house, but it was completely empty. The officers spoke with the neighbors about the incident. They were confused because the people who used to live in that house moved away abruptly for no given reason.
Andrew Tate has just been arrested in Romania for a human trafficking investigation.
Wait. Oh my fucking god! Open your mouth. Open your mouth.
You won't believe what this evil mother did. 29-year-old Jalissa Thaler had a history of mental illness and drug abuse. She had a son named Eli Hart. The cops have visited her home 21 times in the last 10 months for crimes she committed that included stealing from a pharmacy and bizarre behavior. The father had filed for full custody to the state, but ultimately she won the custody of her son. 10 days after winning, she took him shopping, then to get pizza, and then 6 times in the back of her car. The reason why? She wanted his life insurance money. She was found with pieces of brain in her hair. The father is now suing the state, telling reporters that his son was everything to him. Madonna is being accused of child trafficking in Africa. The Ethiopian World Federation is accusing her of adopting African children and using them for trafficking, sexual exploitation, and social experiments in Malawi. Raising Malawi is Madonna's non-profit charity that she organized in 2006 that was said to help with extreme poverty amongst the local orphans and give them health and education. However, the EFW is claiming she only opened up this organization to host social experiments on vulnerable African children, referring to a book Madonna wrote called SEX in 1992 on one page where she explains in great detail of her making love to a teenage boy who is a virgin. EFW claims that Madonna's interest in religious imagery, bestiality, and vulgar lovemaking is what prompted her to open up this orphanage in Malawi. Maybe you shouldn't be looking up to these influencers. Popular influencer Gracie Piscopo's husband of 8 years, Andre, was recently charged and arrested for the alleged murder of his own mother. The body of his mother was found in her multi-million-dollar home in Perth, Australia, on May of 2020. He was caught allegedly forging life insurance documents. Police don't believe Gracie had any involvement. She has wiped her social media clean of him. He's also been charged with 5 counts of fraud. He's pleaded not guilty to the murder, but will face court later next year. Like and follow for more updates on this story. This is why you should be careful when looking for a sugar daddy. In 2019, Mackenzie Lewick was on a sugar daddy website called Seeking Arrangements that a lot of girls used on campus. She then arrived at her home airport around 2 a.m. and texted her mom, "Landed, love you mama." Instead of going home, she went to go meet Ayula Ajavi at a park, a man she met on Seeking Arrangements. But little did she know, this man was a monster. He then took her back to his home where he strangled her with a belt and buried her in the backyard. Police then saw that he was the last person who texted her. His location and hers were last seen together, so they went to his home to investigate. After they left, Ayula then tried hiding her body in a wooded area, but later admitted to it, saying that the reason he did it was because he wanted to know how it felt to unalive someone. He was sentenced to life in prison. This woman made love to 919 men in one day. This is Lisa Sparks, and she holds the world record for the most eggplants in her in 24 hours. She was competing against Candy Apple, who had the previous record of 724 men. But the crazy part is, Lisa beat that record in just 12 hours. That's about 45 seconds for each man. No one has since been able to break her record. Like and follow because my next story will blow your mind. Scary things hidden in Disney movies. Stay to the end to hear a secret. In Tangled, Slender Man is seen on the left. In the movie WALL-E, you can see Rex from Toy Story. And as you can see, he has been separated from the rest of the group and is now all alone. Also, did you ever want to watch movies and TV shows for free? All you have to do is go to the App Store and search and download Marikia. And that's all you gotta do to watch movies and TV shows for free. People are mad at this mom for this.
So Arabella decided to f with my whip shots last night and my up. So now we let her open her gifts and let's see what Santa brought her. Santa ain't bring you shit. Aww. Aww. Cause you been bad. So you're not gonna get shit. Let's see what the next one is. Since you wanna be bad, let's see what Santa brought bad kids. Let's see how Santa treat bad kids.
But let me know what you think. This woman had won $43 million on a slot machine, but the casino only wanted to give her a steak dinner instead. Katrina Bookman was playing the slot machines in New York. She had hit the jackpot and won $43 million. She got so excited, but the casino offered her a steak dinner instead, saying that there was a glitch and that she actually had only won $2.25. They then said the complimentary steak dinner is a gesture of goodwill. What would you do in this situation? Friends say she passed away from alcohol poisoning, but this just doesn't add up to me. Shanquilla Robinson and her friends went to Cabo to celebrate one of their birthdays, but only 24 hours after arriving, their friends called Robinson's mom frantically saying that she passed away from alcohol poisoning and that they couldn't find a pulse on her. But further autopsy from the Mexican FBI found that Robinson had a broken neck and her spine was cracked. Her friends all came home and privated their accounts. Now, I won't show it, but this is what's driving me crazy. Now, supposedly there's a video of Shanquilla in one of the Airbnb rooms naked while getting hit on multiple times by one of the friends, but not fighting her back. And the person behind the camera asking, "Why aren't you fighting back?" She simply replies that she doesn't want to.
Quilla, can you at least fight back? No. At least something? At least fight back, something.
Get up, bro, get up.
She had a heart of gold. She didn't mistreat nobody.
This whole situation angers me. And now I pass the question on to you. What do you guys think happened to Shanquilla? Like and follow for more updates on this story.
Purposes of, town hall. Let's just get into let's just get in via like.
It turns out Greta might have gotten Andrew arrested. That's because when he responded to Greta and had that Jerry's Pizza box in his video, that's all authorities needed to know he was in Romania, and they knew exactly where he was. This influencer said kids with cancer are meant to die. Legendary Leah was streaming and drinking when she started to rant and say this about kids with cancer.
Donate to St. Jude because kids have cancer, but obviously I think people should know by now. I'm gonna be honest because I was a bio major and you should listen to me, but children that have cancer are going to die and they're meant to die. I'm sorry. Children under the age of 10 get cancer is because they have something genetically wrong with them. And that just means something really, really, really awful happened during the genetic sequencing of their bodies.
Hair horror stories. Sierra Champraz was looking to change her hairstyle and, get a sew-in. She found someone who would do it for the cheap. $8 cheap. Don't go for the cheap. When getting it done, she noticed that her hair was being threaded way too tight. But she didn't say anything because she thought it was normal. So she just let it go. After a couple days, her hair started to fall out. She contacted the lady who did her hair and they were like, oh, you left your sew-in too long. Come on now. Her hair was being way too damaged, so she had to cut it off. And then she noticed she had really bad scars. It turns out from all the tightness, her hair was trying to grow out of one pore. Luckily, her hair is grown back now. Like this video if you want a part 2 of hair horror stories. Disgusting facts you wish you never knew. Scientists found that 72% of shopping carts have poop on their handles. Taco Bell's taco beef is only 36% beef. So what's the remaining percent? Bacteria found in poop can pass through 10 layers of toilet paper. So yeah, wash your hands.
Now all of a sudden it's a problem if you meet a man yesterday and the next day he's not offering to pay your rent. That man don't fucking know you. It's crazy though. It is crazy to me.
Flint. And if they say that you're the only girl they're talking to, that you're the only girl he calls baby cake, sweetie, honey.
I am very grateful that I've never been through these situations. But I feel like that's because I will only feel that a man cares about me and loves me until he's paying my rent. If you guys heard this video, if he says.
This is why you should be careful what your kids are watching on Disney+. Parents are upset because on the Disney series The Santa Clauses, on season 1, episode 3 at 25:29, the elves get told to spell "We love Santa," but one of them accidentally misspells Santa, looks down at their mistake, screams, and then fixes it. Some parents think this is just an attempt at dark humor, while other parents are saying it's subliminal and child programming. But what do you think? Like and follow, because my next story is crazy. Disturbing facts you wish you never knew. Grocery stores sometimes mix food coloring in the near expiration date meat to make it look fresh. Chocolate bars have an average of 8 insect legs in each one. Scientists are working on biotechnology that can make prisoners feel like they're serving 1,000-year sentences in a matter of 8 hours. Trigger warning, this case is horrible. China Arnold had a 28-day-old baby named Paris with a man named Terrell Talley in 2005. On the 28th day, she had a huge argument with her man Terrell over the paternity of Paris. That's when Terrell had enough and stormed off to cool down. China, being highly intoxicated, looked at the 20-day-old, looked at her microwave, and did the unthinkable. For 2 minutes, Paris cooked, her insides reaching 108 degrees. China then went to Tyrell, and to his face said, if you hadn't cheated, she would still be alive. After many trials, she now serves a life sentence.